That's a lot louder than I thought. Thank you very much for taking the time, and it's great to see that we're running out of seats, well, from my perspective anyway. Sorry that you've got to sit on the floor. My presentation this afternoon give you something to think about. Like a lot of the stuff that I talk about in the presentations, the materials, the books, blogs, everything, I don't have a silver bullet. That's one of the problems. People say, how do we solve this problem? You are the experts in what you do in diving, which if you're not very experienced, you might think that actually that's not the right thing. You are trying to solve your problems and your safety in your environment. All I can do is give you some ideas, some tools, and processes, and ultimately, hopefully, an attitude that's about curiosity and understanding how it makes sense for people to do what they do. Nobody in diving comes to start the day and say, you know what, I'm going to go out there and get bent. I'm going to get stuck in a dart. I'm going to get stuck in a wreck. I'm going to get entangled. I'm going to run out of gas. Whatever it is, it makes sense for people to do what they do to them. Us on the outside to think that that's completely irrational. Like this diver here who was out on a trip, end of a week-long Trinex diving, 70 meters or so, ends the dive, gets back on the boat, has some visual disturbances similar to aura that you would get from a migraine. Didn't tell anybody in his team. Goes back to the port about half an hour after surfacing, starts unloading the gear, and then gets way more aura, but doesn't say anything to his team. He doesn't have any signs and symptoms of decompression sickness, and after about 2 hours or so, visual disturbances disappear. And he flies home from Malta the following day. What do you think about that diver? That diver was me. And one of the reasons I tell that story is because people get into the very judgmental approach, and that's normal for us to do and behave that way. We talk about the blameworthiness, and there's some interesting research that I've brought together or brought in my mind about a car crash. And this was a scenario where a person's driving home, they're rushing to get home, and they end up crossing a junction, they smash into another car, they injure the other person, and they injure themselves. And the research was, how blameworthy do you think that driver was to create that scenario, that accident? And in the first scenario, they were rushing home to hide a present for their parents' wedding anniversary. And people were like, that 20% blameworthiness. The other scenario was they were rushing home to hide some cocaine before their parents got home. 85% blameworthy. Exactly the same scenario, but we judge differently of what's going on. And unfortunately, we are hardwired to blame and judge about what's going on. Now there's some reasons for that, some positive reasons. One is it's self-defense. We're trying to deflect our own fallibility on others. And if I look at somebody and go, oh, I may make that mistake, that means that I too am fallible, I am incompetent, I might end up getting injured or killed in the same process. So it's much easier to go, you know what, I'll just blame them, and we push the blame on others. We have a thing called distancing through differencing. As long as I can believe that you're different to me, I wouldn't make that mistake. And one of the key things about human factors is, actually, we're all broadly wired the same way. We're going to behave the same way in the same conditions. Which is why, from my background in military aviation and working in oil and gas and healthcare, bringing this into the diving space. Because, well, basically, your brains are all wired the same way. They behave that same way. We will make the same human errors that are there. And then the final piece is about agency, and that's not training agency, it's about how we ascribe action to things or people. So, Anglo-Saxon language, English, predominantly Western English language, is agency-based. So it might be that I knocked that stand. So I am the agent and I knocked it. In Spanish, which is a non-agency language, the stand was knocked. And you think, well, that's a really subtle thing, but it makes a huge difference as to where we focus on things. The diver ran out of gas, the gas ran out. So the agency's on the diver for running out of gas, but that doesn't help us understand the context, and that's what we're trying to do to understand things. Now, I've just finished a master's, it's being marked at the moment, so some of the stuff on here is out with my tutor to get marked, but one of the bits as I collected data and analysed it is, what does an incident mean? And I did some thematic analysis, collect some ideas, and they come under these sorts of topics. So, a deviation from a plan, its potential for harm. Diving takes place in an inherently hazardous, dangerous, austere environment. There is always a potential for harm in what we do. So if we look at these 5 sort of definitions, what's the difference between an incident and a normal dive? And often it's about the outcome, and invariably the severity of the outcome. The more severe things are, the harsher we judge things. And so we have a number of biases that limit our learning opportunities. So outcome bias. If something ends up really bad, we'll judge it more harshly than success. Hey, that was an awesome dive! Look at that, success, great! We got the photos, we got the sketch, we got the samples. Yeah, but there's a huge train wreck behind us. We didn't see that. So we look forward and everything is okay. The severity bias, again, somebody who runs out of gas might get low on gas, totally out of gas. The failure mode is the same, but their attention was somewhere else. The planning wasn't necessarily the same, but we will judge more harshly somebody who has to do a rapid ascent because they run out of gas to somebody who may end up with slightly less than they're expecting on the surface. But the failure modes are the same, the context is the same, and it's that context that we need to dig into. Hindsight bias is where we judge things as if we knew it was always going to happen. I knew that person was going to have the accident. Okay, he knew, why didn't you do something about it? Do you think they knew it was going to happen? Well, yeah, so why did they do it? It's really easy afterwards. Now, people go, we can use hindsight to learn. Yes, we can look back, reflect, and then look to improve our future performance. But it's this bias that says, I knew that was going to happen, or they should have done something, I could have done something. And then the final piece is the fundamental attribution bias. It's so prevalent, that's why it's called this. When things go wrong, we often blame other people for their performance. So you're driving down the motorway, somebody cuts you up, you go, oh, idiot, what are you doing? And you don't understand, actually they might be racing to hospital with a baby in the back because they're ill. But we judge on their individual behavior. We don't look at the context. But if I fail, it wasn't my fault. I didn't have enough time. Nobody gave me the instructions. It wasn't clear. The bit of kit wasn't working properly. And so when we fail, we blame the external. But hey, I succeeded. Look at me. I'm awesome. And I've got a whole bunch of skills. So we internalize the positive and we externalize the failure for us. But we turn it around the other way. So these biases are really powerful and they prevent us from learning. Something else that limits the learning and the flow of things is the power of media and social media that's out there. So, as an example, I don't know if it's working, there we go, is a case that came to be closed last year of a diving instructor, Nigel Craig, whose student died on a dive at Stony Cove. And these were the media headlines the following day after the prosecution delivered their space, their arguments. And social media went absolutely nuts over this. Instructor holds student down, student dies, it's the instructor's fault. When actually, the defense then presented their case and realized that they were trying to prevent a rapid ascent, and the diver who died had an IPE or IPO, emotionally pulmonary edema. And so that contributed to the event that it did. But the way that a story gets out there then changes things massively. And it's really hard to undo that thinking that's there. And the full count you can get on the website. What we've got to do is take a different perspective. Now, in a technical system, a mechanical system, both of those statements are true. We have an object, that cylinder, where the light is being shone, gives us a shadow, and that is true. But in a social technical system, people, we have a huge grey area that sits between those. And our perspective shapes what's going on. This is often shown as, I'm right, you're wrong, you're right, I'm wrong. Well, actually, who put the number 6 or the number 9 on the floor? So to start with, there has to be some level of intent. And fundamentally, in a social technical system where we have people, we construct meaning. It does not exist in an absolute sense. So you are all going to go away after this visit, after this presentation, and have different understandings of what I just presented. And you will tell other people, and they will understand a different version. So we construct that meaning based on our own experiences. So you can look at something and come up with very different answers. We also need to look at what is acceptable, or who defines what's acceptable, whether or not that's social media, whether or not it's the regulator, the health and safety executive, or the judiciary. Each one of us will have a different perspective about what's going on. Social media is incredibly powerful. It's a double-edged sword. It allows stories to get out there. But unfortunately, the vast majority, and the way the algorithms work, focus on the negative aspects that are there. So in the modern safety science world, what we're talking about is different perspectives of safety. The old view, the traditional view of safety is we have to fix the broken, errant, stupid individual people. They are the problem that needs to be fixed, and we do it through control. Whereas actually the modern view of safety is that you are the experts. You solve the problems. It's not about just compliance. Because if accidents happen because people didn't follow rules, we have way more accidents than we actually do. You fill in the gaps between the rules and the reality that's out there. Now safety, this is a colleague of mine, a guy called Todd Conklin, states, safety is not just the absence of accidents and incidents, rather it's the presence of barriers and defenses and the capacity of the system to fail safely. Experience, training, knowledge, equipment certification, they sit on both sides of the accident event itself. Counting adverse events doesn't help us improve safety. We count the absence of safety when things go wrong. We don't count the presence of safety. And that's part of the problem is, hey, we haven't had any accidents. Cool, we must be safe. No, maybe not. So it's about resilience. It's about developing an understanding of the skills and the performance to fail in a complex environment. Now, just as an example, the nuclear industry has understood this for a while. And what's interesting here is there is a delay in how long it takes for the screen to build. Because I've got an image here. This is a system error. Let's see what happens next. Oh. Love it. Great example. Here we go, right. So it was supposed to build in 3 parts. 3 Mile Island, nuclear accident. And one of the reasons was that the display systems to the engineers, it wasn't very clear. The control buttons were all over the place. But the engineers knew that the design sucked. There were so many problems. And so these knobs here are beer pump handles. These 2 identical buttons had very different outcomes. So what they did, they went down to the bar, they stole the beer pump handles, and they whacked them on top of the knobs to make sure that they understood what they were supposed to do. These high reliability organizations recognize failures come from systemic issues. And so in the diving space, linear mills and the dry suit fatality, individual error on the part of the instructor or systemic weaknesses. The documentary I put together, If Only, where the diver enters the water with the rebreather switched off. Bottom left is the number of rebreather fatalities every year, probably around 30 to 35 a year. And then just in the general piece, when people have minor events, don't have to be fatals, they have, can be minor stories that are there. So how do we go about changing that story? How do we create that change? Start off with by recognizing technical skills, which is what majority of diver training programs are about. Buoyancy, propulsion, trim, laying line, using a rebreather, putting a surface marker buoy. Those are technical skills. We've got to look at the context, and I'll dig into that a little bit more in a second. There's some level of randomness, there's some level of luck. Sometimes we are unlucky, but we've got to recover those situations. And the bit at the bottom is about non-technical skills. Situational awareness, decision-making, teamwork, leadership, followership, and communication. So I do work outside the diving space as well, high-risk industries, and concept called human and organizational performance. And the key one in the center of this is context drives behaviors. You can shape people's behaviors about what's going on. The fact that you're sitting on the floor because there aren't enough chairs, well, that's it. And you're sitting on the floor because it's better than standing up. So the environment has shaped your behaviors straight away. So cash machines, they give you the card first and then the cash, because it used to be the other way around. You take the cash, you walk off, and leave your card behind. Now it costs the bank money to replace the card, and potentially counter fraud will happen. So they nudge those behaviors. Like milk and bread are at the back of the supermarket, because then you buy a shed load of stuff when you're going to get milk and bread. IKEA, the masters of context. There's a challenge. Go into IKEA, buy one thing, walk back out again. So there's a blog that talks about these 5 principles and how you can apply those. So we need to dig and understand the context. The reason we need to dig into that is because when we have simple narratives, we start using counterfactuals. Should have, could have, would have, failed to. Those descriptive statements tell a story that didn't exist because we don't have the knowledge. We fill the gaps in. Whereas actually if we have context-rich stories where we have multiple narratives, then we can start to understand the complexity and the conflicts and the goals that need to be dealt with. Any story you hear will have conflicts in it, the stuff that should happen and the stuff that does happen in reality. So one of the tools that I use to get this across in the high-risk industries, it works in the diving space as well, is Jenga. And Jenga works because it's made up of multiple bricks. The more the game progresses, the more unstable the situation is. And the 6 different colors relate to different layers in a systems model. And as you start to take the bricks out, things change. And if you're a leader in an organization, you look down and all you see is no reports. It's perfect, it's great. But then you realize that people have had to adapt and work around and modify their procedures until you get to this situation here. And you sit there and go, but it's still standing. The leadership look down and say, hey, it's all hunky-dory, everything's safe. But there are a whole bunch of things that are going wrong. And this is how you could look at this. Anybody wants a PDF of this deck, come to me afterwards and give me your email address and forward it on. But these are what the different layers within the industry for the diving industry. And unfortunately, when diving incidents happen or stories get told, invariably it's the bottom 2 layers, not what set people up for success or failure that's going on. And this is Andreas, one of my instructors, and this was last February, running through a training class. And Pepe is another instructor filming this. And on the camera,
look at what you're
Pepe
leaving
says,
for me.
look at what you've left me. As Andreas is trying to pull a brick out, and it all goes horribly wrong. Now, in a blameworthy environment, you blame the person who pulled the brick out. It's their fault. They were last to touch it. Aviation used to be like this in the 60s and 70s. You're it, you're last to touch it. Hang on, the pilot's got a vested interest to make sure that he isn't first to arrive at the scene of the accident. He's going to make sure that's the case, but it wasn't until he started to listen to these cockpit voice recorders, they go, oh, there wasn't, they knew that something wasn't quite right, they just couldn't solve the problem in the time, which is why they started to bring in these crew resource management, cockpit resource management programs. Think of a simple scenario like this, and that's how the media would present it. 2 US Air Force F-15 jets shoot down 2 US Army Black Hawk helicopters. And you sit there going, this is in 1994, I was in the Air Force at the time, this is like, these guys are professionals, how could they do this? And this was an influence map or a map of how it all occurred. The bottom left, as you look at it, this is the shootout. And these are all the factors that went into this. It wasn't just shoot them down. There were a number of things that went into this. And the author, Scott Snoot, just talking about, the more I went looking for somebody to pin the blame on, the more I realized that this is normal. This was normal people doing normal work in a normal environment. It happened. And that's really, really frustrating for people because they want to find somebody to pin it on. socially, we want to have somebody to blame, but we've got to tell those stories. And in the training programs that I run and get people to think about these things, is I give them this scenario here. A student diver entered the water from a dive boat while on a rebreather training class. An instructor and 3 other students were present. While awaiting to have their stage cylinder passed down to them, they appeared to have lost consciousness and sank to 40 meters where their body was recovered. And what I do in these sanctions classes, I ask people to say, what do you think happened? And invariably, it's very proximal in time and space, close in time and space as to why the event occurred. And often, why is the instructor out in the water? Why did they outwire him on the boat? And there's an immediate blaming about what's involved because we don't have the information. If we don't have the information, we start filling it in with what we expect should happen, what we believe should be the case. And yet, when I draw a systems map of what actually went into this, here's the hypoxia scenario. And the reason it happened is because the final reason was that the diver entered the water with a rebreather cylinder, oxygen cylinder turned off. Now, they breathed the loop down, the oxygen was metabolized, but because of the way that our body's physiology works, it doesn't matter if there isn't enough oxygen in the breathing loop, it's the amount of CO2 that's there. And there was enough CO2 to keep the breathing circuit in our brains working. And he just passed out. The problem was he was on the water, on the surface of the water, and then sank and drowned. And there wasn't anybody able to recover him in time. Now, I was really fortunate to be able to work with the widow and the dive team to put the documentary If Only together. So if you're any diver, actually anybody in a high-risk environment, go onto the Human Diver site, go and visit the If Only website, and download the workbook. And I know there are a number of people here who use the If Only workshop as part of their training to get people to think about accidents don't happen because of one thing. And often they will always happen because of multiple factors. And people go, all we need to do is break the chain and then it'll all be okay. But in reality, we have multiple things coming together and we have to spot the conditions before they become critical. Turning around and saying, don't do that, pay more attention, be more careful. It doesn't work like that. We have to focus on the specifics. And that's why storytelling becomes so important. Now, agencies, organizations, people like aviation, healthcare, this comes from the rail industry. They want reporting systems to be able to count events. Organizations measure safety by the presence or absence of events, and that's their proxy for safety. Frontline operators, as in this case of this paper, train engineers, they maintain safety by telling stories, what the close calls were, how I nearly got hit by a train, what is it that you're looking for to protect yourself? And they do that by sharing stories. And you invariably will share a story over a pint or a glass of wine after a dive. That was close, better not do that again. But you don't actually think about what goes into it, and that's what the narratives are about. And there are a number of things that stop us telling those narratives, and that's what my research was about, master's thesis. And I distilled it down to these 3 things for this audience. My paper's got a lot more of them. There's 8 in total. There's 4 sits under each of these. So the telling of context-rich stories following an adverse event, that's what I wanted to understand, the factors that contributed to that, the barriers and the enablers. Now, on one side is, what's the event? What's the definition of an incident? And there isn't one. There isn't a clear one. So how do you know what to report? So report something that's unsafe. Well, what does unsafe mean? We're in an inherently hazardous environment. It's unsafe. Now, the agencies don't say that because that's not very good for marketing. What's the context? What's the environment you're in? That also helps contribute to our understanding of the event. How and what to tell. What goes into a learning story? Lots of people don't know how to tell a story. They focus on the last 5-10 minutes, as opposed to all of the stuff that leads into it in days and months, potentially years prior to it. Where to tell that story? Well, the British Tobacco Club have got an incident reporting program, but people don't necessarily be part of the British Tobacco Club. So why would I report to them? So there's, at an individual level, there's some limitations. At the other side, the organizational and cultural factors, those are, the organizations don't teach storytelling to learn. one of the agencies has at the top of their reporting form, this form is being prepared in the event of litigation. Okay, so how much do you think is going to get covered in that, in terms of the trade-offs, the workarounds, the realities of actually going out and doing a dive? I get it, because it's trying to protect people from being sued, but that doesn't help us learn. Fear is a massive thing that limits us. So I'll wait for this next image to go. Right. So as part of the research, I did a number of focus groups, and I can see some laughing. I'll tear them a new one. And so it was interesting. One of the guys in one of the focus groups, cave diving focus group, he said, if somebody compromised safety as a team asset on a dive, like getting low on gas, compromising thirds, or something like that, we'd get on the surface, we'd go over to the car park, and I'd tear them a new one for compromising team safety. It was just like, whoa, okay. So do you think people are going to learn from this? Are they going to want to tell a story again? And what was really interesting was there was a guy in the class and in the focus group who said, I've got a story to tell. I hadn't told anybody this in the 2 years since it happened. Not even his buddy that was there. And he was diving a side mount with stage dive with a scooter, and they were going to go off and do a photo shoot. And he said he hadn't reset his dive computer from his last dive, so it was set on 100% oxygen. So he entered the water breathing 32 nitrox, and he starts descending, and his computer's going absolutely nuts at him for high CNS because the PO2 is going absolutely, what? Oh man! And now he's got to change the gas, and that's flustering him. And so he's now a little bit behind in terms of the mental game. So he's working harder. He drops his cylinder further on in the dive, where it's rather lower volume, gas volume than it should have done. So they go off and they come back, and they forgot to add some extra gas for the photo shoot they were going to do on the way out. So he's now low on gas. He picks up the stage, his buddy picks up the stage, and off they go. He goes off the trigger straight away, and he's still like fumbling, and he hasn't turned the stage on. He can't breathe, and his buddy's off this, chasing after him, and it takes about 100 feet. He goes back onto his other stage, so he's now got mismatched gases, and he looks down and he thinks, oh my God, I'm nearly out of gas. And he's used to swapping his gases, his cylinders, as he should do. He's got 150 psi left in one of the cylinders, which is probably about 15 bar. And he's thinking, gets to the deco stop, gets on his deco gas, thinking, what the hell is going on? And then realizes that he hasn't swapped his cylinders at all on the exit. So he's got way more gas than he thinks he has. But in his head, he thinks he's run out. And I said to this guy, he said, I'll tell you a new one. What do you think now? Oh yeah, context makes a difference. And that was one of the big things that came out from the research, was that if there's more context, people are more willing to share a story. And I'll come on to an example of that in a minute. So we need to be able to reflect, we need to be able to tell those stories. And one of the ways to do that through the classes is the debrief model. And you can download that from this address here. As I say, you get the deck later on. Psychological safety is this shared belief that it's okay to make a mistake, to speak up, to challenge, to basically take an interpersonal risk. Am I going to get in trouble socially for saying this? And the diving industry doesn't have this. It's not very mature. People are quite easy to throw metaphorical rocks at others. And what I'm quite proud of is the community that developed in the Facebook group is that when people start throwing those rocks, I don't have to be there. Others will start going, no, get back. That's not how it is around here. And then they were, okay, not realizing that it's a grown-up, mature community. So there are multiple ways. So we can do a task debrief, but we can also do a learning review or another piece of learning from adverse events, a couple of documents that you can go and find online. The one on the left-hand side I put together specifically for diving, to dig into how it made sense for people to do what they did. And the other one is blogs. And I've just reposted a couple of these into the Facebook group. This one was quite interesting. This was by Phil Short, and they had a CO2 hit because there was a tiny little bit of wood getting to one of the mushroom valves that allowed CO2 to bypass and end up with CO2 in it. And there were a bunch of people who went, that wouldn't make a difference. And then the military diving conference last year, one of the kinetic staff were looking at a military rebreather, and there was a bug stuck in one of the mushroom valves. And this was a really interesting multiple failure. So the mouthpiece had been put onto the rebreather back to front, which should have, the mushroom valves should have prevented it from being breathed. But because there was an insect in the mushroom valve, it allowed them to actually, and there was no counter-locking nuts, so you couldn't assemble it, you could assemble it the wrong way. But it was a really interesting piece of thing. Multiple failures allowed a high CO2 situation to develop in a diver in a similar situation to this. And where that piece of wood came from was in the head pool when they were getting ready. So they got in, did all of their pre-dive checks properly, and then when they were getting themselves ready on the surface, a little bit of stuff floating around the head pool got into the breathing loop, and then kept the mushroom valve open. One of the biggest frustrations I have is people come to me and go, "Hey Gareth, I've got a story that you can't tell anybody." Great, thanks. That just means I collect these stories, but I can't tell people because I sort of maintain that confidentiality. And it's really frustrating. Invariably, it's because there's a fear of a whole bunch of things. And this includes instructors within organizations, having been inside an organization, there's fear of causing ripples. Fear is really pervasive, and we've got to break that down. We've got to recognize that we're all human, we all make mistakes. And part of that is understanding the environment we're in. So this concept of varieties of human work, looking at work as imagined. In my head, I've got an idea about how to put a training program together. I then document it. The problem is when I document something, it's always a subset of work as imagined. I can't write everything down. It often works on optimal conditions. And then I'll give it to an instructor. Now, in one company, I'm very punitive. I'm going to punish people for not following through. So there you go, you're one of my instructors. In 3 months' time, there you go, this document set. I want you to train 20 people, and if you don't, you know you're going to be in trouble for it. So there you go, off you go. And he picks it up and goes, Gareth has no idea how to run this program. But I know if I don't deliver, I'm going to be in trouble. So I leave him, and I come back in 3 months' time. How you doing? It's awesome. Got the guys through, everybody's good. We've ticked all the boxes, sorted. And I am none the wiser as to the risks that exist. Whereas actually, if I work in another organisation with this gentleman, and actually I'm much more inclusive, and say, we go back to work as imagined, and say, hey, I've got an idea about putting this program together. Can you help me write this stuff? Actually, I know some other experts in this. Can we do this together? It's like, yeah, cool. So we write it, and then we trial it. We experiment. And the difference between an experiment and a pilot class, the pilot nearly always carries through because there's sunk costs involved. Experiments, it might work, it might succeed, it might fail. So take that approach. And then I ask, how does it work? And this bit sucks, this bit works. And the difference is the presence of psychological safety in a just culture. We've got to create that learning environment through telling stories. Provide feedback as we go along. Now there's a YouTube channel for the Human Diver, the conference 2.5 years ago now. The presentation I gave on the second day was all about the messy world of diving. And it just talks about the conflicts, the trade-offs that divers have to deal with in the real world. But you go and speak to the quality control people within the agencies, we don't get reports, it's all okay. Really? And I get lots of things back from this. But again, you can't tell that. Because if you tell them, they might find out that I'm doing something wrong, but I have to break the rules to get the job done. So as an example of this is a presentation given at DEMA last year, an event that happened November 22. So this is a World War II wreck. It's upside down in Palau, in about 30 meters. It's got a bomb hole, it's got a torpedo hole, and this team of 4 divers enter this upside down wreck without laying line. They get lost and they spend what should have been a 2-hour dive turns into a 5.5-hour dive because it all went horribly wrong. They used a guide who dived this wreck about 60, 70 times. He knew his way around. They were doing a swim through from one side to the other. as they got to the other side of the wreck, it had collapsed. And there was a whole bunch of silt, and there's now 4 divers inside this wreck, and they hadn't laid a line because they hadn't planned to do that. So they turn around, they go out, or in fact they stay where they are, 3 stay where they are, and the guide lays line to find the exit. It takes him 3 goes, he finds where they came in, and as he's wriggling through, the wreck collapses on his back as well. So now they've had 2 collapses, and now there's 4 of them stuck inside this wreck in 0 viz. The guys were saying wearing a nerd couldn't really see what it was saying. So they regrouped, and then they managed to find a clean space, banging on the wreck, and the safety divers alerted the 2 divers who'd just got out of the water, who went, grabbed all the cylinders they could, and basically one of the guys squirreled in and found these guys and then led the way out. And the article is in this link here. This is their shearwater downloads. There's a point where they're sitting for an hour and a half in the wreck, the 3 of them in 0 viz, doing nothing and hoping that their guide can find a way out. And actually, the narrative there was really powerful. And the comment here is, "I'm feeling very vulnerable here," was from Aaron, who was leading the expedition. And he and I have got a good relationship. And he stood up there and I said, "Look, just get it out there, tell people." And when he explained the context, everybody went, "Oh my God, I'm really glad it wasn't me." But the number of people, and I purposely put a contentious heading up there: divers don't, enter the wreck and don't lay line. That is a normal thing. So we've got to understand, what does normal look like? So one of the things, and I've seen 10. 2 points. There we go. There. So we're having this discussion, and it's one of the sort of bits we talk about in the class. Were you lucky or were you good? And, oh yeah, we were good. All right, tell me exactly what you did that you can replicate the next time. Oh yeah, maybe we were lucky. And there is a lot of luck involved in what's going on, but it shouldn't be part of your initial plan. It's about looking for those contingencies, but we don't know what might go wrong because we don't tell those stories. And this is one of my favorite quotes here. "One way of looking at this might be, for 42 years, I've been making small, regular deposits in this bank of experience, education and training. And on January 15th, the balance was sufficient so that I could make a very large withdrawal." Captain Sullenberger ditched on the Hudson. And this is one of the hardest bits. He's an expert. How do you get expertise, tacit knowledge out of somebody's head? Storytelling. That's how it works. And that is success and failure, and create an environment where it's safe to do so. And this is something that came up in a class in January this year. I was like, hang on a minute, that's a great little sort of snippet. You can't reflect in the moment until you've reflected on the moment. And what that means is you've got to have a debrief. You've got to understand how it made sense for you to do what you did. And then you can start preparing for the next dive, or the next activity, or whatever you're doing. And this blog here talks about why diving incident stories are good and bad. It talks about shifting from novice to mastery and expertise. And mastery in the technical sense, not how some of the agencies define mastery. It's really this piece that when you're a novice, you follow rules because you have to. You don't know what you don't know, and you're given this guidance. But as you develop your expertise, you start to leave the rules behind because you understand how the real world operates. And the training systems, in my perspective, are about teaching students how to pass a class, not necessarily how to teach them how to dive in the real world. And the instructor development programs are about teaching instructors how to teach a student, not how to teach out in the real world. So, sort of wrapping up, we learn through stories. Just think about millennia of how we get ideas across. Aborigines crossing the Australian outback through storytelling. Thousands of miles of desert, no map, no GPS, no compass, the stars, but they'll tell stories about the stars. The more context there is, the more learning that's possible, and the less judgment that comes as a consequence, because people can sit there and go, "Oh, right, that's how it makes sense." Local rationality. The important piece here is, how did it make sense for them, not you weren't there. You didn't have the information that was there. You didn't have their drivers, their motivations, their experience, their knowledge, their goals. All of those things belong to them. So understand their local rationality. Be curious. Try to understand that piece that's going on. And finally, human error is not a cause. If you see in any report that says human error, pilot error, diver error, it's BS. That's the point where you start looking and say, how would it make sense? What were the conditions that led to that event? And so a final piece, which I normally don't put up because I'm rubbish at marketing, is if you want to get a book, there's some here, but you can get them online. I've just launched a large language model, an AI model, that's got about 400,000 words of training, and there's 110,000 words in Under Pressure. So 4 books worth of stuff that's gone into it. And it's there as a way of giving you shortcuts. You can reinforce your knowledge, your training, continue the training that's going on. There's a couple of magazine articles coming out about that. There's a podcast, I think we're up to about 46 episodes now. And they are 5 to 15 minute long little snippets, and they cover the blogs that are there. And then the blogs, there's 260, 270 blogs in there. Loads of knowledge. Go and read the stuff, go and find it, and transfer it to your diving space. As I said right at the start, you're the experts in what you do. Tell the stories. And that, takes me to the end of this presentation. Thank you. I've got about 5 minutes before I've got to go. So shout out any questions, otherwise I'll be standing to the side if you want to grab any questions. So the question is, am I going to publish the master's thesis? Yes. Lund is a great university like that, and as soon as it's published, we'll write a series of blogs that summarise it, but the thesis will be available online. Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Yes. Yes, certainly. What I'll do is I'll move my